The Galactic Consortium had existed for over 12,000 years, and in all that time they had cataloged every intelligent species in the known universe. They had mapped every star system and documented every civilization that had ever risen or fallen across the spiral arms of the galaxy. The Volari were the oldest among them, with their crystalline bodies that sang with harmonic frequencies when they communicated. The Krixtel were insectoid warriors with 4 arms and mandibles that could crush steel. The Dorothy were ancient gray beings who floated rather than walked, and who kept the records of galactic history in their vast memory banks. Together with dozens of other species, they had built a civilization that spanned thousands of worlds, and they believed they understood everything there was to understand about the universe. But there was one species that existed only in their legends. One species that appeared in their oldest texts as nothing more than myth and fantasy. They called them humans, and the stories about them were told to children as bedtime tales or used by parents to frighten disobedient young ones into behaving. The ancient records spoke of bipedal creatures from a small blue planet called Earth in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. These creatures supposedly had soft skin and fragile bodies, and yet the legends claimed they possessed an unbreakable will to survive. The myth said humans could endure any hardship and overcome any obstacle through sheer determination. But the records also said that humans had destroyed themselves thousands of years ago in a great war of fire and radiation. They were supposed to be extinct. They were supposed to be fiction. High Counselor Zethran of the Volari had heard these stories since he was a young crystal barely formed in the nursery caves of his homeworld. He had always found them amusing in a quaint sort of way. The idea that a species so physically weak could accomplish the feats described in the legends seemed laughable to him. He had far more important things to worry about as the leader of the Consortium Council. Trade disputes between member worlds required his attention. Resource allocation needed to be balanced. Military readiness had to be maintained against the various threats that lurked in the dark spaces between stars. Myths about extinct aliens were the last thing on his mind, as he sat in his observation chamber reviewing reports from the outer territories. The alarms changed everything. Lieutenant Kirasol burst into the chamber with her crystalline facets flickering in patterns that indicated extreme distress. She was young for a Volari officer, barely 300 years old, and Zethran had never seen her lose her composure before. But now her harmonic voice crackled with what could only be described as panic as she delivered her report. 17 vessels had emerged from fold space at the edge of Consortium territory. Their configuration matched nothing in the database. Their energy signatures were unlike anything the sensors had ever recorded, and their hull markings matched descriptions found only in the mythological archives. The archives that contained information about humans. Zethran felt his resonance frequency spike in a way it had not done in over 2,000 years. He rose from his seat and moved to the main display terminal where the sensor data was being projected in real time. The ships were unlike anything he had seen before. They were angular and aggressive, looking with heavy armor plating and weapons arrays that bristled from every surface. They moved through space with a predatory grace that spoke of a species that had learned to fight for its survival. On the hull of the lid vessel, letters were painted in a language the translation matrices struggled to process. USS Endeavour. And beneath those letters flew a flag of red and white stripes with a blue field filled with stars. Admiral Daniel Brooks stood on the bridge of the Endeavour, watching the alien station grow larger on the view screen. He was 62 years old with gray hair cropped short in military fashion and a face weathered by 3 decades of service to the United Earth Navy. Behind him, his crew worked their stations with the quiet efficiency that came from years of training and discipline. They had trained for this moment. They had prepared for first contact with alien civilizations ever since humanity had developed fold space technology. But no amount of training could fully prepare a person for the reality of meeting intelligent life from another world. Captain Lisa Martinez stood at his side reviewing the sensor data on her personal display. She was his executive officer and had served with him for 15 years, through countless missions and more than a few close calls. She was calm and competent, and Brooks trusted her judgment more than almost anyone else in the fleet. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite the magnitude of what they were witnessing. The station was massive, she reported. Population estimates suggested hundreds of thousands of inhabitants. Energy signatures indicated technology far more advanced than anything humanity had developed. And the station's defensive systems were powering up with what appeared to be a significant number of weapons, tracking the human fleet. Lieutenant Kevin Park worked frantically at the communication station, trying to establish a channel with the alien station. He was young for his position, only 28 years old, but he had a gift for languages and signal processing that had earned him a place on the flagship. After several minutes of adjustments, he announced that he had isolated their transmission frequency and believed he could establish basic communication. Admiral Brooks straightened his uniform and prepared himself for the most important conversation in human history. 8 billion people back on Earth were counting on him to represent humanity well. Countless generations of dreamers and scientists and explorers had wondered if humanity was alone in the universe, and now he would be the one to answer that question. He ordered Park to open the channel. On Citadel Station, the main display flickered to life, and for the first time in 3,000 years, an alien species saw a living human face. 2 eyes set in a flat face with skin that was a light brown color and hair that was gray and short on top of his head. The creature wore a uniform of dark blue with medals pinned to its chest, and when it spoke, the translation matrices worked overtime to convert the sounds into meaning. This is Admiral Daniel Brooks of the United Earth Navy vessel Endeavour. We come in peace, seeking to establish diplomatic relations with your civilization. We mean you no harm. High Counselor Zethran found himself unable to respond. Around him, his advisors had fallen into stunned silence. The myths were real. The stories were true. Humans existed, and they had just announced their presence to a galaxy that had long ago written them off as legend. The High Counselor looked at the face on the screen and realized that everything the Consortium believed about the universe had just been proven wrong. The fictional species had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The council chamber erupted into chaos the moment the transmission ended. Representatives from a dozen different species shouted over each other in their native languages, while the translation system struggled to keep pace with the flood of voices. The Crystal delegate clicked his mandibles so rapidly that it sounded like a machine gun firing, as he insisted that the humans must be some kind of elaborate deception. The Dorothy representative called for calm and careful study, while her gray form rippled with barely contained excitement. The Valari military commanders demanded immediate defensive measures and the deployment of the warfleet. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone wanted to be heard at once. High Counselor Zeth Ren silenced them all with a resonance burst that shook the walls of the chamber and rattled the fixtures. The sound was painful, even to species that did not hear in the traditional sense, and it achieved its intended effect of shutting everyone up immediately. Into the sudden silence, Zethran spoke with a calm authority that belied the turmoil he felt within his crystalline structure. The humans were here whether the Council wished it or not. They had technology capable of fold space travel, which meant they had reached a level of advancement that could not be ignored or dismissed. The Consortium would receive their diplomatic delegation, and they would learn what they could about this species that everyone had believed to be extinct. They would proceed with caution, but they would proceed. General Crixvan of the Consortium Defense Force was not satisfied with this approach. His forearms crossed over his armored chest as he voiced his concerns in the clicking language of his people. The legends spoke of humans as warriors without equal. The ancient texts described them as survivors who could not be broken and conquerors who could not be stopped. If even a fraction of those stories were true, then allowing human vessels to approach the station was an unacceptable risk. Zethran reminded the general that the legends also said humans were extinct. Perhaps it was time to stop relying on legends and start gathering facts. Ambassador Melvani of the Dorothy floated forward from her position near the back of the chamber. She was ancient, even by the standards of her long-lived species, and she had studied the human legends more thoroughly than anyone else in the consortium. Her elongated gray body trembled slightly as she spoke, and her voice carried the weight of centuries of accumulated wisdom. She had always wondered if the stories might contain some kernel of truth. Now she would have the chance to find out. On the Endeavour, Admiral Brooks waited patiently for a response to his transmission. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances as the minutes stretched on. First contact protocols had prepared them for many scenarios, but prolonged silence was not among them. Dr. Nancy Webb, the ship's xenolinguist, broke the tension with a quiet observation. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper intellect who had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. Perhaps the aliens did not understand them, she suggested. Or perhaps they were as shocked to see humans as humans were to see them. The translation matrices had clearly worked since the aliens had been able to process Admiral Brooks' message, but understanding words was not the same as understanding intentions. Chief Engineer Tony Russo muttered something from his station about the galaxy, thinking humans were make-believe. He was a practical man who preferred machines to mysteries, and he found the whole situation deeply unsettling. He would have been much happier if the first aliens they encountered had simply said hello and started talking about trade agreements instead of staring at them like they had seen ghosts. The view screen finally flickered and an alien face appeared. It was crystalline and beautiful in an abstract geometric way, with facets that caught the light and refracted it into dozens of tiny rainbows. When it spoke, the voice carried a harmonic quality that was almost musical. High Counselor Zethran introduced himself as the representative of the Valari, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Consortium. His words were carefully chosen, and his tone was measured, but even through the translation there was no hiding the disbelief that colored his statement. They had not believed humans existed. Humanity was considered myths among the people of the consortium, legends, stories told to children to entertain or frighten them. The High Counselor wanted to know how humans could be standing before them now. Admiral Brooks allowed himself a small smile. He assured the High Counselor that humans were very real and that they had a great many questions about their neighbors in this galaxy. Zethran pressed further. The consortium records indicated that humanity had destroyed itself thousands of years ago. The species was supposed to have perished in nuclear fire, as so many promising civilizations had done before them. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. How had humans survived when all evidence suggested they should be long dead? The Admiral's smile faded slightly as he considered his response. Humanity had come very close to destroying itself. That much was true. But humans had a talent for surviving things that should kill them. It was perhaps their greatest strength as a species. He requested permission to send a diplomatic delegation to the station so the proper discussions could take place. There was clearly much to discuss. The debate that followed within the council chamber was heated but brief. Ambassador Melvani argued passionately for accepting the human delegation. This was an unprecedented opportunity to learn about a species that had been considered fictional for millennia. The scientific and historical value alone was incalculable. General Crixvan continued to urge caution, but even he had to admit that refusing contact entirely would only delay the inevitable. The humans were here, and they clearly had the technology to go wherever they pleased. Better to engage with them on consortium terms than to force a confrontation. Zethran made the final decision. The human delegation would be received with appropriate ceremony and security. The consortium would learn what it could about these impossible visitors and then determine how to proceed. He transmitted the invitation personally to Admiral Brooks and watched on the display as the human commander received the news with visible relief. On the Endeavor, Captain Martinez began selecting personnel for the diplomatic party. She chose carefully, knowing that the people she picked would be representing all of humanity in the Vayend. Eyes of an alien civilization, Dr. Webb was an obvious choice given her expertise in communication and linguistics. A security detail would be necessary, but she selected Marines who were known for their discipline and restraint rather than their aggression. Admiral Brooks would lead the delegation himself. This was not a duty he could delegate to anyone else, no matter how much easier it might have been to remain safely aboard his ship. Humanity was about to take its first steps into a larger universe, and he intended to be at the front of that journey. The shuttle launched from the Endeavor's bay and began its approach to Citadel Station. Through the viewport, the massive structure loomed larger and larger until it filled the entire field of view. Admiral Brooks looked at the alien construction with wonder and determination in equal measure. He had spent his entire career preparing for challenges that would test his abilities and his resolve. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. He was about to meet beings from another world and convince them that humanity deserved a place among the stars. The weight of that responsibility settled onto his shoulders, and he accepted it willingly. This was what he had been born to do. The diplomatic shuttle touched down in the docking bay of Citadel Station, and for the first time in recorded galactic history, humans set foot on alien territory. Admiral Daniel Brooks led the delegation down the boarding ramp with Captain Lisa Martinez on his right and Dr. Nancy Webb on his left. Behind them walked 4 Marines in dress uniforms who carried sidearms but kept their hands carefully visible and away from their weapons. Every movement they made had been planned and rehearsed because they all understood that the slightest misstep could have consequences for all of humanity. The welcoming committee that awaited them was equally impressive in its composition. High Counselor Zethran stood at the front of the assembly, with his crystalline form catching the artificial lights and scattering them into cascades of color. Ambassador Melvani of the Dorothy hovered nearby, her ancient gray body rippling with undisguised curiosity as she studied the humans with eyes that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic history. General Crixvan stood at rigid attention, his forearms clasped behind his back and his mandibles still as he assessed the potential threat these visitors might pose. Representatives from 6 other species completed the gathering, and every single one of them was struggling to reconcile the reality before them with the myths they had believed their entire lives. Zethran stepped forward and welcomed Admiral Brooks to Citadel Station on behalf of the entire galactic consortium. His harmonic voice was carefully modulated to convey respect, and his words were formal and precise. He acknowledged that this was a historic moment that none of them had anticipated in their lifetimes, and he expressed the hope that it would mark the beginning of a productive relationship between their peoples. Admiral Brooks responded with equal formality. He thanked the High Counselor for the welcome and assured him that humanity had come seeking friendship and mutual understanding. The discovery that they were not alone in the universe represented the fulfillment of dreams that humans had held for centuries. To meet other intelligent species and learn from their wisdom was an honor beyond measure. Ambassador Melvani could contain her curiosity no longer. She floated forward and addressed the Admiral directly with an apology for her directness, but an insistence that she must ask certain questions. The Dorothy had preserved records dating back over 50,000 years, and in those records humanity was described as a young species that had barely begun to explore their own solar system. Then all references to humans ceased completely. The consortium had assumed that humanity had succumbed to what they called the Great Filter. This was the term they used for the self-destruction that claimed so many promising civilizations before they could achieve interstellar travel. Yet here the humans stood alive and apparently thriving. The ambassador wanted to know how this was possible. Admiral Brooks exchanged a brief glance with Dr. Webb before responding. He confirmed that the consortium records were probably accurate, at least regarding the timeline. Approximately 300 years ago, by human reckoning, humanity had come very close to destroying itself completely. They had developed weapons capable of ending all life on their planet, and they had come within minutes of using those weapons. Human historians called this period the last crisis, and it remained the darkest chapter in their species' history. But they had survived. The last crisis killed 2 billion people and rendered much of Earth uninhabitable for decades afterward. Entire nations were wiped from existence. Entire cultures were lost forever. The survivors emerged into a world that had been transformed into a wasteland by their own folly. It would have been easy to give up. It would have been understandable to simply fade away into extinction, as so many other species apparently had done. But humans did not give up. They rebuilt their civilization from the ashes. They learned from their mistakes. And they swore that they would never again come so close to the edge of annihilation. Dr. Webb added more details to the Admiral's account. The last crisis fundamentally changed human society in ways that were difficult to overstate. Humanity realized that their survival depended on expanding beyond their home planet. Within 50 years of the crisis, they had established permanent colonies on their moon and on the neighboring planet they called Mars. Within a century, they had spread throughout their entire solar system with outposts on moons and asteroids and space stations orbiting distant worlds. And then 20 years ago, they had discovered something that changed everything. General Crixvin's mandibles clicked with sudden interest. He wanted to know what they had discovered. Captain Martinez answered the question. Human explorers had found an artifact on one of the moons orbiting their largest gas giant. The artifact was clearly not of human origin. It was ancient beyond their ability to measure, and it contained technology that humanity had never imagined possible. Specifically, it contained the principles behind fold space travel, the ability to bend space itself and cross interstellar distances in moments rather than centuries. The alien delegates murmured among themselves at this revelation. High Counselor Zethran processed the information with growing unease. The humans had crossed interstellar space in vessels. They had built themselves using technology they had reverse-engineered from an unknown source. They had accomplished this in only 20 years. The implications were staggering. Admiral Brooks corrected him gently. It had actually only taken 17 years from the discovery of the artifact to the launch of the first interstellar fleet. Humanity had been highly motivated to achieve this goal. When you have nearly destroyed yourself once, the desire to find new homes among the stars becomes quite urgent. Every species in the consortium had taken centuries to develop forward space capability after discovering the basic principles. The idea that humans had done it in less than 2 decades was almost impossible to believe. Either they were exceptionally gifted or exceptionally lucky or exceptionally dangerous. The council members looked at each other with the same thought passing through their varied minds. Perhaps the legends about human determination and resilience had not been exaggerations after all. Ambassador Melvani asked another question. She wanted to know about the artifact itself. Who had built it, and why had it been left for humans to find? The Admiral admitted that they did not know the answer to that question. The artifact's creators remained a mystery. Some human scientists believed it had been left deliberately as a gift to any species intelligent enough to find and use it. Others thought it might have been a test of some kind. Still others suggested that it was simply debris from some long, dead civilization that happened to crash on that particular moon millions of years ago. Whatever its origin, the artifact had given humanity the key to reaching the stars. Zethran considered everything he had heard. The humans had nearly destroyed themselves, but they had survived. They had found alien technology and mastered it faster than any species in consortium history. They had built a fleet of warships and traveled across the void to find their place in the galaxy. The legend said humans were stubborn and resilient and impossible to break. Looking at the delegation standing before him, Zethran was beginning to believe that perhaps those legends had actually understated the truth. 3 days had passed since the human delegation arrived on Citadel Station, and the diplomatic talks were proceeding smoothly. Admiral Brooks spent long hours in meetings with representatives from various consortium species, learning about their history and their culture and their laws. Dr. Webb worked tirelessly with alien linguists to improve the translation protocols so that future communication would be clearer and more precise. Captain Martinez coordinated with consortium security forces to establish protocols for the human fleet's presence in their space. Everything seemed to be going well until the crisis arrived without any warning at all. The alarms began screaming throughout the station, and Admiral Brooks looked up from the conference table where he had been reviewing trade proposals with the Valari economic minister. High Counselor Zethran burst into the room with his crystalline form flickering in patterns that indicated extreme distress. A massive vessel had emerged from fold space at the edge of consortium territory. It was unlike anything in their database. Its hull appeared to be organic, covered in what looked like scales or thick chitin, and it had immediately begun firing on the nearest colony world. Ambassador Melvani appeared moments later, and her ancient gray form was trembling in a way that Admiral Brooks had not seen before. She spoke a single word that sent a chill through everyone present. The Devourers had returned. Admiral Brooks demanded an explanation. He had never heard of the Devourers before, and he needed to understand what the consortium was facing. Zethran explained quickly. The Devourers were a species that existed only to consume. They appeared every few millennia without any warning and attacked consortium worlds without any attempt at communication or negotiation. They stripped entire planets of resources and slaughtered any populations they encountered. Then they vanished back into the void before the consortium could mount an effective military response. In all the thousands of years of recorded encounters, the consortium had never successfully engaged a Devourer vessel in combat. Their only survival strategy had been to evacuate populations before the Devourers reached them. Admiral Brooks asked how many people lived on the colony that was under attack. Zethran's response was grim. 3 million souls inhabited that world, and there was no way to evacuate them all before the Devourer vessel reached the surface. The Admiral was already moving toward the door when he spoke again. Then they would not evacuate. They would fight. The council chamber erupted into protests. General Crixvan blocked his path with all 4 arms spread wide. He insisted that the Admiral could not be serious. The Devourers had destroyed entire fleets over the millennia. The 17 human ships would be annihilated within minutes of engaging such an enemy. Admiral Brooks acknowledged that possibility, but he pointed out that those 3 million people would definitely die if no one did anything to stop the Devourer. He ordered Captain Martinez to signal the human fleet and bring all ships to combat stations. They were moving to intercept. High Counselor Zethran called after him as he strode toward the shuttle bay. This was madness. The humans knew nothing of the enemy they were about to face. They had no experience fighting Devourers. They would be throwing away their lives for nothing. Admiral Brooks paused at the threshold and turned back to face the assembled aliens. He told them that humanity had spent most of its history fighting wars they could not win against enemies they could not defeat. They had fought diseases that killed millions. They had fought natural disasters that leveled entire cities. They had fought their own worst impulses and their own capacity for destruction. And they were still here. Whatever the Devourer was, it had never faced anything like human beings. The United Earth Fleet moved into position between the Devourer vessel and the colony world. On the bridge of the Endeavour, Admiral Brooks studied the tactical display with cold calculation as chief engineer. Tony Russo delivered his assessment. The enemy ship was massive, at least 10 times the displacement of the entire human fleet combined. Its weapon systems were so advanced that the sensors could not even identify them properly. Its armor was so thick that human scanners could not penetrate it. On paper, the humans did not stand a chance. Admiral Brooks ordered Lieutenant Kevin Park to open a channel to the entire fleet. When the channel was open, he addressed his people with words that would be remembered for generations. In a few minutes, they would engage an enemy that the rest of the galaxy considered unstoppable. The Devourers had never been beaten. They had never been challenged. And they had never met human beings. Today, the fleet would show them what that meant. Today, they would remind the universe why humanity was still alive after everything that should have killed them. He gave the order. Weapons free. The battle that followed would be recorded in consortium archives as the miracle of Vertex Colony. 17 human vessels engaged a Devourer ship that had destroyed entire armadas without effort. The humans used tactics that no species in the consortium had ever seen before. They sacrificed shields for speed, using their greater maneuverability to avoid the worst of the enemy fire. They coordinated their attacks with a precision that seemed almost telepathic, weaving between each other's firing solutions to create overlapping fields of destruction. They exploited weaknesses in the enemy vessel that no one had ever thought to look for. 3 human ships were destroyed in the first exchange of fire. The USS Defiant took a direct hit that killed half her crew instantly, but the survivors managed to bury a torpedo in what appeared to be the Devourer's primary weapons array before their ship broke apart. The Endeavour lost her port engines to an energy beam that carved through her hull like a hot knife. Through butter, but she kept fighting. Admiral Brooks refused to withdraw, even as damage reports flooded in from every section of his wounded vessel. The turning point came when Captain Martinez noticed something that no one else had seen. The Devourer's armor regenerated after taking damage, but there was a delay. Every time the ship was hit, there was a window of approximately 3 seconds where the wound remained, vulnerable before the organic material could repair itself. If they could concentrate fire and hit the same spot twice within that window, they might be able to punch through. Admiral Brooks ordered the information broadcast to the entire fleet immediately. The surviving ships reformed their attack patterns and began focusing their weapons on single points. The first coordinated strike burned through a section of armor that had just been damaged by another vessel. The second strike penetrated deeper. The third reached something vital inside the Devourer and triggered an explosion that tore through an entire section of the enemy ship. The Devourer that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia began to falter under the concentrated human assault. Its regeneration could not keep pace with the focused attacks. The humans pressed their advantage, relentlessly refusing to give the enemy even a moment to recover. They tore the monster apart piece by piece until finally the last human torpedo found its mark and the Devourer vessel exploded in a blast of light that lit up the void like a new star being born. Admiral Brooks slumped in his command chair as the debris field expanded on his view screen. 14 ships remained of his original 17. Hundreds of human lives had been lost in the engagement. But 3 million colonists on the world below were still alive because humans had refused to accept that the battle was unwinnable. The myths about human stubbornness and determination had just been proven true in the most spectacular way possible. The ceremony was held 1 week after the Battle of Vertex Colony in the Great Hall of Citadel Station. Representatives from every species in the Galactic Consortium attended, filling the vast chamber with a kaleidoscope of forms and colors and textures that would have overwhelmed human senses just a month earlier. The surviving crews of the human fleet stood together in their dress uniforms, bearing the wounds they had received in the battle with quiet dignity. Admiral Daniel Brooks stood at the center of it all with his arm in a sling from injuries he had sustained when a console exploded on the bridge of the Endeavour during the final moments of the engagement. High Counselor Zethran approached the ceremonial podium, and his crystalline form radiated colors that the humans had learned indicated deep respect and profound emotion. He addressed the assembly with words that would be transmitted to every world in the consortium. For 3,000 years, the people of the consortium had believed humans were fiction. They had told stories about humanity to their children. Tales of impossible resilience. Tales of stubborn determination. Tales of a species that refused to accept defeat no matter how overwhelming the odds against them. They had thought these were exaggerations created to entertain or to teach moral lessons. They had dismissed them as fantasies that had no basis in reality. They had been wrong. The High Counselor turned to face the human delegation directly. The humans had saved 3 million lives on Vertex Colony. They had fought an enemy that the consortium had feared for millennia, and they had emerged victorious. They had accomplished what no other species had ever managed to do. And they had done this not for payment or territory or power. They had done it because innocent people were in danger, and the humans had decided that they could not stand by and watch those people die. Ambassador Melvani rose to speak next, and her ancient voice carried through the great hall with a weight that silenced every murmur and whisper. The Dorothy had kept records for 50,000 years, she reminded the assembly. In all that time, they had watched countless species rise and fall. They had witnessed empires crumble into dust and civilizations fade into obscurity. They had documented every significant event in galactic history. But in all those millennia, they had never seen anything quite like humanity. Humans were young by the standards of the galaxy. They were brash and sometimes reckless. They made decisions that seemed foolish to older and more cautious species. But they were also brave beyond measure. They were compassionate towards strangers they had never met. They were unwilling to surrender even when all hope seemed lost. These were qualities that had become rare in the consortium over the long centuries. The ambassador believed that humanity's arrival might remind them all of values they had forgotten. General Crixvin approached the podium next, and his mandibles clicked in patterns that the translation systems identified as deep admiration. He confessed that his people, the Crixdal, had used human stories to frighten their young for generations. They told children that humans would come for them if they misbehaved. Now he understood that they had gotten the story completely wrong. Humans did not come for the disobedient. Humans came for those who threatened the innocent. And for the first time in generations, the innocent had a protector who would not run away when faced with darkness. Admiral Brooks stepped forward to address the assembled representatives and the countless billions watching via transmission across consortium space. He looked tired and older than he had appeared just 1 week earlier. The weight of the lives lost under his command was visible in his eyes and in the lines of his face. But his voice was steady when he spoke, and his words carried the conviction of someone who had faced the worst and refused to break. He thanked the High Counselor and the Ambassador and the General for their kind words. But he wanted them to understand that the truth was simpler than the legends made it seem. Humans were not special because of anything inherent in their biology or their technology. They were not chosen by fate or destiny or any higher power. They were special because they had learned from their mistakes. 300 years ago, humanity had nearly destroyed itself. They knew what extinction looked like. They had stared into that abyss and seen the end of everything they loved reflected back at them. That experience had changed them in ways that could never be undone. They had decided that if they were going to survive, they would do so by being better than their worst impulses, by helping others whenever they could, by standing up for those who could not protect themselves. Humanity had come to this region of space hoping to find neighbors who might become friends. What they had found instead was a family they had never known existed. A family that needed help against ancient enemies and new threats. If the consortium would have them, humanity would be honored to stand alongside their new partners. Not as myths or legends, but as allies and friends who would face whatever challenges the universe presented together. The vote to accept humanity into the Galactic Consortium was unanimous. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Consortium welcomed a new member species into their ranks. High Counselor Zethran Admiral Brooks signed the formal treaty together in a ceremony that was broadcast to trillions of viewers across known space. As the delegates mingled after the signing, Dr. Nancy Webb found herself standing beside Ambassador Malvani near one of the great observation windows. The ancient Dorothy was watching the humans interact with the various alien species, and her expression was unreadable to human eyes. Dr. Webb asked if she could pose a question. When the ambassador agreed, she asked about the human legends that the Dorothy had preserved. Had the ambassador ever truly believed that humans might exist somewhere out among the stars? Malvani was quiet for a long moment before responding. She shared something that she had never told another living being in all her 10,000 years of life. When she was young and barely 500 years old, she had read the human legends obsessively. She had studied every fragment of information about this supposedly fictional species. And she had believed. She had believed that somewhere out there a species existed that could survive anything. A species that could face any challenge and refuse to break no matter the cost. She had believed, and then she had grown older, and she had stopped believing because all the evidence said humans had destroyed themselves. Today she had learned that her younger self had been wiser than she knew. The evidence had been wrong, and the legends had been true. Now she would get to watch as a species of survivors wrote a new chapter in galactic history. Dr. Webb smiled and asked if the ambassador had any predictions about how that chapter might end. The ancient Dorothy made a sound that might have been a laugh. She said that if there was one thing she had learned from the past week, it was that predicting what humans would do was utterly impossible. The only certainty was that the galaxy would be far more interesting because of their presence. Outside the observation windows, the human fleet hung in the void, battered but unbroken. The USS Endeavour floated at their center with her hull scarred from battle and her name still visible despite the damage she had sustained. Below her, Citadel Station continued its eternal rotation, now home to the newest members of galactic civilization. The myths had become reality, and the legends had come to life. Humanity had found its place among the stars, through courage and sacrifice and an unbreakable determination to protect those who needed protection. The story of their journey was only just beginning, and the universe waited to see what they would accomplish next. Whatever challenges lay ahead, the humans would face them as they always had, together and unbowed and ready for whatever came next.